Hey, Warren Ross, estate planning attorney, and this week we're starting to wrap up what is about a 3-year probate. And a lot of people, when they hear, a 3-year probate, they might assume that maybe there's a lot of assets on the line or there are a lot of people that we're dealing with, a lot of beneficiaries. That's not the case here. So with this particular probate, we have a man who passed away in Georgia. He had his house here. He also happened to have a house in North Carolina. Not a whole lot of money in there, but he had his ex-wife as his executor, and he had his sister as the main beneficiary. So when we were starting this probate, I had everybody come into the office. Everybody agreed on everything. They said, we want this to be as simple as possible. And so we got into the probate process, and as soon as we started, everybody stopped getting along really quickly. The sister hired her own attorney to represent her in this probate. She also hired an attorney to represent her for North Carolina. So not only is she building up billable hours here, she's building up billable hours in North Carolina too. And that's not coming out of the estate, that's out of her own pocket, which is essentially going to come out of the estate eventually, since she is the main beneficiary of the estate. So what happens when we have these probates is ideally everybody gets along, but a lot of times that doesn't happen because there's a lot of things under the surface. A lot of times people don't really get along that well. Most of the time, it's not a situation where we have an ex-wife and a sister. It's usually siblings. There's a lot of sibling rivalry under the surface. Sometimes people, they don't get along because of something that happened 20 or 30 years ago. They remember something from when they're 12. They've been holding that under the surface for a long time. And then when you get to this probate process, everything comes out because you have a parent pass away, and a lot of people are in a really bad emotional state when that happens. It's never really easy if a parent passes away. And then you have on top of that the idea that there's money involved. A lot of people have money problems, especially right now with the whole COVID issue. A lot of people are out of work. If you have money problems piled on top of that, people can get nasty really fast. So a lot of people might assume that since we have a 3-year probate, there's a lot of money involved, there's a lot of beneficiaries. Not all the time. It really happens a lot where we have just, what you would think would be a very simple estate, but because of one thing or another, it's dragged out for years, and it costs tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees. Because I know the hours that I've put in, I have no idea what the sister's attorney has done. I have no idea what the sister's attorney in North Carolina has done, but I know it's probably going to be a pretty good amount of money that she's going to spend on this probate. And, at the end of the day, it really wasn't all that necessary because my client, the executor, she had no intention of doing anything irregular or wrong. She just wants to simplify everything and just end this. She basically gave up at one point because this is really difficult for her emotionally. And now she has her ex-husband's sister basically, accusing her of not really doing things the proper way. And that's really emotionally draining. So if we can, especially when we have people with property in more than one state, we try to put that into a living trust, because when we put property into a living trust, that means it doesn't go through probate. So we could have skipped the probate here. We could have also skipped the probate in North Carolina. So for a lot of people, a living trust makes more sense than going through this probate. Because again, probate, it's not always that hard. It's not always that difficult, but it's kind of a crapshoot. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So there's no reason to risk all that when for less than the cost of just our retainer for this probate, they could have put everything into a living trust and avoided all of these issues. So a living trust is basically probate insurance. You're going to pass away at some point. At some point, we're going to have to transfer your assets to other people, to someone else. So it's better to avoid that if you can, especially if you're in a situation where your ex-wife is your executor and your sister is the main beneficiary, because that's just a recipe for disaster. But even if you just have a few kids, a lot of times people say, my kids all get along, everything's going to be fine. I'm sure your kids are great, but a lot of people are holding things under the surface. A lot of people have money problems. And a lot of people are really influenced by their spouse. Even if the spouse is not a beneficiary of your estate, you know, if my wife tells me something, I'm probably going to listen. So it can really get difficult sometimes. So that's basically all I've got to say on that. You know, probate is kind of a crapshoot. You never know which way it's going to go. It's a lot easier to avoid the possibility that something might go wrong and it might cost tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees, when for a fraction of that, you can skip all that, you can keep everything private, and we can have things done as quickly and easily as possible.